To help do this, I brought along a friend. His name is Joe, and he's a system manager for a very large city located here in Florida. The best way to present our B-Scada solution is to provide some real-world cases that will help facilitate the message that I'm trying to deliver. So I think by doing this, you're going to see some of the benefits that somebody could realize by taking advantage of a B-Scada solution. Now keep in mind that some of these industries that I'm talking about may not relate to you, but I believe some of the same problems exist across different industries. So let's get started. Joe, again, is a system manager for a large city here located in Florida. And he's responsible for some very different applications. Some include an electrical substation, water treatment plants, pump stations, building automation solutions, and even wind farms. So Joe has a lot of responsibilities, but the problem that Joe was facing is that all these systems worked independently, meaning that none of them communicated with each other. So for somebody to collectively look and see what's going on in the whole city at any given time was impossible. Well, that was before a B-Scada solution. See, B-Scada, what we specialize in is collecting disparate information, organizing that information, and giving that back out to the end user on any device. So again, what that means is that Joe would now have a solution where he would be able to communicate and effectively see all the real-time information coming from these independent applications that used to not talk to each other, and be able to see this information on any device, including iPads, iPhones, Blackberries, and Androids. So what we end up with was originally a city that looked like this. There was no communication at all between the different applications. And we now have something that Joe can actually see what's going on and make changes based on the values he's seeing. Let's take a look at another situation. This time we're going to go into the substation here. And we can see that we're presented with the real-time information. But there was a couple problems that this particular application was seeing. They noticed a drop in electricity production on certain days and at certain times, but there was no equipment that was bad. So there was no reports of equipment failure. So we need to try to figure out how are we going to monitor this, and how are we going to address the problem that we're facing right now. So at a glance, I could take a look and I could see some very basic information, some calculations that are being done. I've got hourly revenue being generated for me. I've got an overall station efficiency that's being generated for me. But let's go back to the problem at hand, and how do we solve this? So what Joe decided to do was he was going to put an alarm and a notification using the B-Scada solution on a value. So if the said value goes below a certain level, I want to trigger some alerts, I want to trigger some alarms, maybe generate some reports. All this is made possible through B-Scada. Now traditionally, to do to have that kind of flexibility, you would need to go to other applications to do that. Or maybe it's 5 or 6 applications that you're running, and each one of those would have their own separate alerts and alarms. What we're proposing here is we could set up a trigger on a value, and if that value does something that we don't want it to do, we can send alarms, we can set values on other things inside of the system that we're monitoring, or generate reports. So let's take a look at how that's done. I'm going to click on the distribution bus details page, which is showing me some real-time information. I've got some nice charts here I can look at. But I notice I have one little outlier here that's kind of not up to par with the others. So let me go ahead and click on this distribution bus and see what's going on. Now, all the data that's being fed into the system currently is random. So I need to trigger these alarms and conditions myself. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this slider down to 0. And that's going to set up a chain of events that the software is going to do for me automatically to let the end user know that there's a problem. So I'm going to set that down to 0. You'll see the data changing here into the trend. And what's going to happen is the system's going to notice that this has taken place, and it's going to fire an event that is going to allow this pop-up message to be viewed. What it's also going to do is it can send an email out to management, and it also is going to generate a report. So let me go ahead and take a look at that report. So what this report is showing me is the last 2 minutes of data before that line went down. Again, these are things that you can configure yourself. So the report itself is all configurable, and you can tell what data you want to show. Now this could be very important for somebody to say if a line were to go down or production was stalled, I could take a look at the last 2 minutes or last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and try to figure out and pinpoint where the problem was coming from. Now you may be shocked to hear, but what the problem was actually coming from is that the workers were actually going out on their smoke breaks altogether. By doing that, they were shutting down some lines, which were then becoming idle, so the production was dropped back down. So let's go ahead and bump this production back up to a normal level. Again, I think you can see this may not pertain to your industry, but the whole idea here is I can set up conditional triggers that are monitoring real-time values, and then based on those values, if they exceed some threshold or go down to some level, I can then trigger a set of events that the software will handle automatically, send emails, generate reports, turn things on and off, so that the end user is either it's brought to their attention quickly, or the software goes ahead and handles the problem by itself. While we're on this page, let's go ahead and take a look at some other things. So here I'm calculating the overall equipment efficiency. That's another thing that you can do with the B-Scada solution, is you have the ability to write in custom calculations as well. So if you have custom algorithms, if you have custom calculations that are giving you efficiencies on equipment, all of that information can be created and again presented under one solution. So before in the past you may have to have done these calculations in another application, maybe an ERP system, in order to see what was going on with the actual equipment. Well, now we're proposing that you can bring in this information into one platform and have all the data that you need turned into actionable information through the B-Scada solution. Let's go ahead and go back to the main menu. I want to take a quick look at the alarms page and just let you know as well that this system can also be set up to display alarms as well. So you may think of this as a traditional SCADA system, but what I'd like to say is that we do much more than a traditional SCADA system. Usually with a traditional system, you're paying for modules. You want alarming, you want historical data, you want workflow, you want asset management. All these different things are usually modules or totally separate applications that you have to purchase. With B-Scada, the solution is all-inclusive, meaning that we will include every module into the basic package. The other nice thing about that is as we add on modules to the system, you'll get them at no extra charge. So everything is included, and you'll never have to buy anything more with a B-Scada solution. Let's go back to the main menu, and I want to show you one other application. But before I do that, let's think about what maybe a pump station manager or a maintenance manager would go through on a day-to-day basis. So usually you would have a pump station manager, and he's in charge of a select number of stations that he needs to monitor. In most cases, those stations are not feeding data back to any central hub. So he has to take a route and go manually check on each pump station. That's if the office hasn't called him and let him know of a problem. So engineer gets in his truck, starts his truck, maybe goes to the gas station, fills it up, and starts his day. Well, let's say that the office then calls him and he has a problem. So he needs to go immediately to that pump station to find out what the issue is. Because there's no real information that's sent to him, he needs to investigate every part of that pump station to figure out what was going on. Now, of course, he may have some common things that he knows to look at. But again, he has to do everything manually. So he goes to that pump station, and he eventually figures out that it was a burnt pump drive. Well, now what the engineer needs to do is, if he doesn't have that part in his truck, he has to go to a warehouse to get that part. So there's another drive to the warehouse. Well, let's say he arrives at the warehouse and realizes that he doesn't have that part in stock. Now he's in big trouble. Now he needs to call other companies and figure out if they have that part in stock. He can eventually find one, but let's say it's 2 towns over. So again, that's another 2-hour drive to get the part, bring it back. Now I have to install the part. You see where this is adding up, and all these extra costs are starting to come into play here. So he installs the part, everybody's happy. But it's 8:30 at night. So that means for that manager or that engineer, he's getting home late, he missed tucking his kids into bed, and he's eating a cold dinner. So all these things have happened because there was no proper way to display information from the pump stations. Again, that was before a B-Scada solution. So let's take a look at what we could do. There would be a way with the B-Scada solution to have data fed into one location from each individual pump station. This screen is showing that solution. So let's say I'm monitoring, in this example, 2 pump stations. I can immediately see the basic information on each pump station and plan my day accordingly to what pump station needs the most attention. Let's go ahead and just click on one of these pump stations. So once I'm in a pump station now, I'm seeing information that pertains to that individual pump station. I can click on the line, and I can see some individual information coming in from that line. But here's the kicker. Because B-Scada specializes in collecting information from non-traditional locations, so it could be coming from a database, it could be coming from an ERP system, from a PLC, from an OPC server, from a hardware sensor. Because we're collecting this information from all these different sources, we have a better understanding of what the whole overall system is doing. So that example I gave where let's say we had a problem here at this pump station and we needed to fix a pump drive. Well, I can immediately go into my parts page and I can see all my current inventory. Now let's go back to the example. Remember we had said that the current inventory was out, so the maintenance manager had to then go find this part. Well, that too could have been prevented with the B-Scada solution. So for example, if this part drops below a certain level, I want to fire an event. So I drop the inventory level down to 2. Immediately I'm seen with an event that says the inventory level is low. I can choose to dismiss this message and maybe order later, or I can say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and purchase this. And what's going to happen is it's going to create a purchase order for me that I can then print off, send to somebody, and get that part ordered so I don't run into this situation where I need that part and I don't have them on hand. So again, we're taking the traditional approach of visualizing this information and we're expanding it to other things. Now I have an inventory control system that I can use in conjunction with my traditional SCADA system. Let's go ahead and bump this inventory level back up. The other thing too is everything is also bidirectional, meaning I can send values back to the original source. So you can see here I changed the quantity to 15. That's now updating my inventory to let the end users know that I have 15 of these parts in stock. The other thing I wanted to share is, wouldn't it be nice for this engineer to be able to do all of the things that I just went over from an iPad? Well, I'm here to tell you that you can. So I'm going to open up a new window, and I'm going to log into our gateway. This is a web solution. It's using pure HTML5, so this will be able to be viewed on any device. So here's my maintenance engineer. I pull up a browser in my truck, and I can see what's going on with those individual stations. Again, just to kind of hit that point home, go into my iPhone simulator, get my gateway address, and I've got the same information now on my iPhone. Pretty amazing. And the nice thing about this is there's no extra work at all for the end user to do. So I think that gives you some pretty good ideas of what the B-Scada solution could provide, some of the problems that we're helping address for these end users. Let's go ahead and talk about how this system was made. Behind the system is a concept of, that we take advantage of that's called data modeling or information modeling. If you're not familiar with that solution or that concept, let's go ahead and take a look at what that means. So everybody has a cell phone. If you were to look at that cell phone and look at your contact list, that's a virtual representation of all the people that you know or care to know that are stored in your phone. That essentially is a data model. So if we think of it more about maybe sensors or different equipment, so instead of having a new contact, you would have something like a new motor or a new temperature sensor. And those things would have attached properties that you care about, such as first name, last name. But in our world, those would be like temperature value or asset name or when was this maintained. You can see a data model or information model simply resembles your contact list in your cell phone. And that's a great way of thinking of it. And to build that model, you open up an application that's called the Data Model Designer. And the very first thing you're going to do is create some types. Now what a type is a very generic something that exists in the thing that you want to monitor. In the examples that we were showing, we're going to start out with creating an equipment type. So I would say add new root type and give it a name. In this case, I named it equipment. You then attach properties to those types. So for example, on any piece of equipment, I want to be concerned with asset tag, when it was manufactured, what the model number is, are there any work orders assigned to it? So very basic properties that I would like to be viewable on any piece of equipment that I'm monitoring. The next thing I can do is create what's called a subtype. Now what a subtype will do is if you think of it as a parent-child relationship, a subtype will inherit any properties that are found on its parent. So all these subtypes I have in my list, they will have every property that's found on equipment, as well as their own specific properties. So if we take a look at motor, we can see I've got motor speed. The other nice thing that you can do with the type system is for every motor I create, let's say I want to create an alarm on my motor speed. So I simply create an alarm here. And to do that, all I have to do is say add alarm. The beauty of this, though, is that for every motor I create, it's now going to have that attached alarm. So I only have to do it once. Let's take a look at another example. Maybe on this distribution bus. So for example, that trigger where the line voltage had dropped, if I want to set that up, I would set up what's called a condition on that property. And here I'm saying if the voltage goes below 100, I want you to do something. And we'll show you how we configured the do's in the software here in a second. The other thing that you can do with the type system is you can make complex types. What a complex type is, it's essentially a type that's made up of other types. So for example, if I click on pump station and click on components, I can see that a pump station is made up of these things. If I click on pump line, I can see a pump line is made up of these pieces of equipment. So what's going to happen is when a user creates a new pump station, it's going to create the pump lines for them. By creating the pump lines, it's going to create these pieces of equipment for them. So again, it's another way that we can help minimize the project development of this solution. The other thing that you can do inside of the data model designer is you can also decide if you want a property to be stored historically. And doing that is very simple. I click on properties, I click on the property that I want to be stored, and I check this historizing checkbox. Of course, there's a couple other advanced features that you can do as well, such as configuring when you want those values logged, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, on a percent change, on a value change. All these things can be configured inside of the data model designer. Once you have a basic type structure defined, the next thing you're going to do is create your assets. And what an asset is, if you were to refer back to the cell phone example, when you create a new contact, you're essentially creating a new asset. That's what we're doing here. I'm going to click on Asset, and I'm going to say I want to create a new asset. So in the demo that we saw, I have a town. I have different components of that town. So let's go to the pump station. And I have different views with all of my pump stations. All the pump stations have all the corresponding lines with all the pieces of equipment. Again, the nice thing is, if I remember we created that alarm on that motor, every time I create a new motor, it's going to create that alarm for me. Very, very nice, easy system to use, and it allows you to really scale up your application. Let's go ahead and just create a new pump station to see how that's done. So I'm going to create a new asset, but first I'm going to create a collection that's going to hold those assets. And I'm just going to call this My Pump Stations. I have my pump stations created. Now what I want to do is actually create a new asset. So I'm going to say Create Asset, pick the type I want, say Create a new pump station, give it a name, hit OK, and what the software is going to do is it's going to create that pump station for me, but it's also going to create all the alarms, all the historical configurations, all my conditional triggers, all my equipment that is associated with the pump station. So here's my basic properties. Here's my pump line it created. Here's all the equipment that's associated with the pump line, and again, creates everything for me. Now you could be asking yourself, okay, I've created this model, and I've got these real-world things. Now how do I get the data to my model? Well, it's a very good question, and the next step that you're going to do is click on Data Mappings. I have a configuration that's open right now that will edit, but what you would need to do is say File New and create a new configuration. Then you select where the data is coming from. So we have a bunch of sources that you can choose where your data is coming from. Could be coming from OPC, could be coming from a PLC, a database, different hardware sensors. Wherever the data is coming from, you would select that type here. Now, if you don't see your data type in here, let's say you have a custom proprietary protocol or some different hardware sensors that you need to talk to, there's no worry there. B-Scada can write a data connector that will talk to the type of data you need. So we're a very flexible and open solution that allows for you or B-Scada to create that connection to the data. Once you've picked your type, I'm going to go ahead and hit Connect. And then I'm going to say Configure Mappings. So this is where you would go and configure your mappings. You're essentially taking where the data is coming from and plugging it into your model. So here's my pump station example. If I were to say Pump Station 1, select maybe energy cost, and go ahead and tie that down to where the data could be coming from. All I have to do now is hit Add Mapping. It's going to attach this ramp 50 value to the energy cost on my Pump Station 1. Very simple to do. The other nice thing we've done as well is if you have a big model, you're able to export these mappings into a CSV file and edit them that way as well. Again, we're trying to minimize your development time so that you can start discovering your ROI as soon as possible. Let me go ahead and hit close on this window. The last thing I kind of want to talk about is how we configure the workflows. Now remember, those were the triggers that were being monitored by the software, and if those triggers were tripped, the software would then do a chain of events. Well, this is where you define those events that are occurring. You would create new tasks that are doing something. So for example, this check valve PO, what it's doing is it's creating a new asset. In this case, it's creating a purchase order every time that that trigger is met. And we can see what trigger is being met by creating a workflow. So here's our check valves workflow, the tasks that are happening, which are over here, and then the trigger that's happening is if the inventory level is low. So on any property where this trigger is defined, it's going to say, oh, your inventory is low, I want you to do this. Again, very simple to set up, very simple to use. The other things that we can do inside of the data model designer is set up user security. We use Windows Authentication and LDAP, as well as our own database. So you can set up users, set up roles, and set up workspaces. That's about all I want to cover today in the data model designer. Let's talk about the next steps. So once you have your model created, the next thing that you're going to do is open up the Mimic Designer and start creating some graphical representations of how you want this data displayed. This is probably the fun part to most. Now, when you create a new document inside of the Mimic Designer, you have two options. You can either create a Mimic template or a Mimic. They're two very different things, and they offer their own advantages. Let's first talk about creating a Mimic. When you create a Mimic, what the Mimic will do is it will look for an asset to get its information from. So for example, if I wanted to create a simple home screen, hit OK. I'm presented with a blank canvas. I have some tools here on my right that I can use. Everything is all drag and drop, so it's very simple to use. Let's go ahead and just make something here quickly. You may know what I'm making right now. We are located in Florida, so I do have a soft spot in my heart for Walt Disney World. So we have a gauge here that's going to be displaying some information. Now with these gauges, you can also click on Properties and define how you want these gauges to look. So they're completely customizable. But once you have your controls on the screen that you want to start showing data for, to connect those controls to show data, you go into the data binding panel. And because we're using a Mimic, we get to browse the whole model. So if I go into, like, say, Assets, Town, I can see every single asset I have created. Now to bind that to the new pump station we created, all I have to do is say pump station, CO2 emission, value, hit apply. This control is now listening to this property on this individual asset. That's a Mimic. I'm going to go ahead and close this and not save anything. The next thing I want to do is create a Mimic template. Now to do that, I'm going to open an existing template that I have. In this case, I'm going to use the pump station template. So what this graphic will do is it's going to represent every single pump station I have in my facility. Another example would be if you had 50 motors that you wanted to display. In a traditional system, you would have to create 50 different screens. Well, what we're doing here in our B-Scada solution is allowing you to create a template that represents a motor type, or in this case, a pump station type. So what that means is I create one graphic, and that graphic is going to represent all the pump stations or all the motors that I have in my facility. Again, saving you precious development time, as well as keeping your maintenance down, because if something were to change here, I only have to change it in one spot. So let's see how these controls are bound. I'm going to go ahead and click on a gauge, and you can see that my data binding tree looks a little different. I now have a relative type tree option. So what I'm going to do is instead of binding directly to an asset, I'm binding to the type. And if I expand type, because I'm creating a pump station template, the type that I'm going to see is in fact a pump station. So this gauge here, if I expand this out a little bit, you can see that it's just bound to the power consumption value. There's no direct asset attached to it. It's just going to the power consumption. Again, the beauty of this is it's going to save you development time and it's going to save you a lot of maintenance. Now you could be asking yourself though, okay, well how does it know though what asset I want to look at? Well, let's go ahead and open up that home screen so we can see how that's set up. So we're back to the home screen that we looked at previously. And I can see I have little icons here with some navigation buttons on it. So the navigation buttons, which we have a bunch of, they take you to different parts of the software wherever you define that button to take you once you click it. Now what we're doing here is if I go into properties and I say setup, this is where we're telling the software what asset we'd like to view and what document we want to open. So for example, in this one, the document that I'm opening is the pump station template, but the asset that I like to get the information from is this particular pump station. If I go ahead and click on the other one, you can see that the document is exactly the same. The only thing that's changing is where the data is coming from. That's how you tell what asset, or that's what you tell the software what asset you'd like to view from. The other beauty about the Mimic Designer is that everything that is created here is going to be supported in the web, with a few exceptions. There are some charts and different controls that we have that aren't currently supported in HTML5, but will be. But in order to help you out, all you have to do is select that HTML5 checkbox, and you'll be limited to what controls are currently supported in HTML5. That way you can go ahead and design and have no worries about something not being supported in the web browser. Let's go ahead and talk about the web browser for a second. The only thing that you'll need to host a web solution in HTML5 is an IIS server. That's it. And we'll show you how easy that is to go ahead and view that information. So again, all the end user would have to do is hit a website, since IIS is just a web hosted solution, browse for the page they want to view, and they can see their information. There's a couple other things that we've done as well. For example, you could have automatic login to the web. You can have auto login to the Windows client as well. And the other thing that you can do as well is tie different mimics down to certain people. So maybe you have electrical engineers and you have a whole set of screens that you only want them to see. Well, you can configure that with the B-Scada solution. I hope I demonstrated today some of the benefits that you'll receive from using a B-Scada solution. What I'd like to ask, if you have any other questions, to please go ahead and email us and we'll get those answered. Again, thanks again for taking the time to look at our B-Scada solution. I hope it's answered some questions for you and you can see the power and flexibility that we offer with real-time data visualization coming from any data source, any location, and can be viewed on any device from anywhere in the world. Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.